Hello and welcome to Veterans of the Valley. I'm Tom Turbeville. Bill Harper does not have any real war stories to tell from his 2 hitches and more than 5 years in military service. But the one that he does tell is indeed a witness to history. November the 1st, 1952, from the deck of the USS Estes near Eniwetok Island in the Marshall Islands. Bill Harper was one of those who watched the result of Operation Ivy, the very first hydrogen bomb explosion. Bill Harper has never discussed his specific duties in regard to Operation Ivy, and he never will. But he can describe in detail the incredible sight and effect of the detonation of a bomb some 500 times more powerful than the atomic bombs that ended World War II some 7 years earlier. And there are other fascinating stories to tell, like how he got to Texas by sailing down the Illinois and the mighty Mississippi rivers from Lake Superior to the Gulf of Mexico. Please welcome William T. Bill Harper to Veterans of the Valley. It's indeed a pleasure, Bill, to have you and for you to tell your remarkable story. You enlisted in the Army in 1948. They were downsizing after World War II, but before Korea. So you got out in 1950, but then you re-upped again. And between 1951 and 1954 is when this incredible story unfolded. And I want to get right to that, Operation Ivy. Sort of talk about the time that you first found out that you were going to be involved in something a little bit different, a little bit secretive. Talk about that.
A little bit different is right.
Yes.
Tom, I was stationed in Warrenton, Virginia, I was in the Army Security Agency, which was a branch of CIA in the early days of CIA. And we were stationed in Warrenton, Virginia, and they in a Signal Corps unit. And we were told to go home the weekend and tell your family that you're leaving for overseas and you won't be back for some period of time. We're not telling you where you're going. We're not telling you what you're going to do. We're not telling you how long you're going to be there. But you better tell your wife and family that you won't be back for a while. Mm-hmm. So I did. I went home to Philadelphia from Warrenton, Virginia, hitchhiking both ways, as we did in those days, and told my wife, I'm sorry, I'm leaving courtesy of the Army. I can't tell you where I'm going or what I'll be doing, but somewhere around your birthday, which was November 11th, mm-hmm. You'll probably see something in the news that will give you a clue as to where I am. Now, I could say that face to face. I could never write that in a letter because it would have been censored out. But anyhow, that's what happened when I was given the word. And we never did know where we were going and why we were going there until we got there.
Right.
We shipped out of Washington, D.C. Going overseas, they put us on an airplane. Coming home, they put us on a troop ship. Mm-hmm. That's the way the Army does things, I suppose. But we left Washington National Airport, flew to San Francisco, and then flew over to Eniwetok. And we arrived there in August, I think it was, of 1952.
Right.
And we're billeted on the island itself. A lot of the folks in this task force were on ships out in the sea. We were in tents on the island. I mean, that's in tents, mm-hmm. T-E-N-T-S.
Right.
And that's when we found out why we were there. And it was kind of shocking at the time to realize the import and the historic significance of why we were there. Right. Being an old Philadelphia boy, I had no thoughts that I'd ever be involved in anything like this, despite my time with the newspaper.
Right. You were on the USS Estes, as we said in the beginning.
Right.
And while, like you said, very admirably, you took an oath many years ago not to discuss your specific duties, an oath that you honor to this day. It was a communications ship, is what it was, is what the Estes was.
Yes, the Estes was the command ship
right.
for the entire Operation Ivy.
Right.
That's where all the brass was, that's where all the bigwigs were, all the VIPs, and a whole bunch of us lowly GIs.
Right. This island, Eniwetok, so people can get an idea, it was small. You described it as 5 miles long, about 600 yards wide, 6 football fields, that's all, mm-hmm. wide, mm-hmm. and only about 6 feet above sea level.
Its highest point was 6 feet above sea level.
And there were literally hundreds or 1,000 military, civilian personnel on this very small strip of
On
land
the
getting ready
island
for this.
and on the boats,
Right.
on the ships.
Right.
A ship carries boats. I have to remember to say ship instead of boat.
Right.
Yes, and there were, the VIPs were not on the island. They were in the captain's quarters or what have you on the ships. But the lowly GIs were in the tents on the island.
They were going to explode the first hydrogen bomb, and that's what Operation Ivy was all about. I want you to talk about the rumor mill, because this is a fascinating part of this story, because this is something that had never happened before. Nobody really knew what was going to happen. The scientists had an idea, but the rumors really ran rampant, didn't they?
They did indeed, and they covered the waterfront, so to speak, if I may use that pun, no pun intended. We heard rumors that the Russians were out there surrounding us in submarines and spying on the operation. We heard rumors that the Russians, and remember, this is the beginning years of the Cold War when things were pretty intense. We had just come out of the Berlin airlift and all that kind of thing, so things were tense. And we heard rumors that the Russians were going to invade our fleet with their fleet and capture all these scientists and take them back to Leningrad or wherever so that they could develop their own hydrogen bomb. They had just developed their own atomic bomb the previous year. And that's when President Truman gave the authorization to go ahead with the hydrogen bomb, knowing that now the Russians had the atomic bomb. But we did have all these rumors floating around, and that's so typical, as you know from your experience, in any kind of a military operation. And for the record, we learned pretty quickly that if you bet against rumors 9 times out of 10, you're going to make money. So, but nonetheless, the rumors were there. And then, of course, there was the, quote, mother of all rumors, unquote, that this thing, when touched off, could ignite the world. And that's a pretty scary thought. Now,
Indeed.
well, you know, I didn't get a chance to say goodbye to my wife and family. I didn't know this was going to happen.
Right.
So that thing, that rumor was really rampant, running all through the tents and on shipboard. It had pretty much been refuted by scientists in their atomic bomb work. The same rumor happened with that endeavor. And we had it with this one. And the point is that despite what the scientists say or said, this was going to be the first time in the history of mankind that this thing was going to be detonated.
Right.
There was a possibility, no matter how remote, there's still that possibility that this thing is going to ignite the world. And we're all incinerated, and that's the end of it. Well, that'll keep you awake nights if you let it.
Because after all, this was, like we said, this was a force that was some, as I read in my own research, some 500 times the force of the atomic bombs that had been dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
That's right. And
So
who really knew?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Take us to November 1st, 1952, when you all woke up that morning, I guess a few hours before the countdown was to end and the detonation. Take us through that morning.
Shot time on the morning of November 1st, 1952 was 8 a.m. We were up at 4, whether we had the bugle blowing us reveille or what, we were still up in anticipation. We finished our normal chores of the morning, the mess hall and what have you. And then we were sent out on deck of the Estes. I'm sorry, we had come out to the Estes via these LCI landing craft infantry boats from the island to the ship.
Right.
And as a matter of fact, we were ferried every day back and forth that way to the command ship. So we were on the ship and rousted out and came up on deck somewhere, I don't know, 6:30 in the morning. And there wasn't anything for us to do at this point, at least in my area of interest. And we went out on deck and just stood around out there smoking cigarettes and making jokes and doing all the things that GIs do in their idle time. Well, then about 7:15 started the serious countdown. T-minus, as all we've seen on the television with the moonshots and what have you. And the countdown went on, and I was amazed at how precise it was, because honest engine, at 8 a.m. 000000, that thing went boom. And when that thing went boom, it was the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my life.
You talked about how some of the higher ups who had the goggles,
Oh,
the
yes.
protective goggles, they were okay, but they had ordered the rest of you to turn away, to put your eyes in the crook of your arm and
right.
don't look at this thing.
That's right.
To which you all said,
Well,
tell them what you did.
Well, you know, if this is the end of the world, Jack, I don't care what you tell me to do. I'm going to do whatever I want.
Right.
And most of us felt that way. And we were, as you said, we were told to stand away, you know, 180 degrees away from this target out there. And don't look at it, because you're going to lose your eyeballs if you do. Mm-hmm. And as you mentioned, the scientists and the brass had looked like welders' glasses on, and they could look at it with those glasses. We could not. We didn't even have sunglasses to shield us. But as I said, when you're facing the end of the world, I don't care. Court-martial me in the hereafter.
Right. And this was history after all. So,
it was, and I didn't want to miss it.
Right.
And neither did anybody else, I think, I'm pretty sure, at that time. So when we heard the 10, 9, 8, 7, we were standing facing the bulkhead of the ship, and we just slowly I-turned, as they've said on some movie or some such thing. And we watched it, and we saw it. And as I'm looking at you right now, there's not been that much effect on my eyeballs, so it was just an over-exaggeration on the part of the military to not look at this thing, because you'll lose your eyeballs.
Indeed. The brightness of what you, well, talk about then what you saw. There was silence.
Oh, yes.
You saw before you heard.
Well, you know, the speed of light is a lot faster than the speed of sound, and we were 30 miles away on the ship.
Now you say 30 miles away. That was the official distance, although you believe that you were closer because
I do indeed.
of how much you could see given the horizon that there would have been had it really been 30 miles, right?
There's a rule of thumb that when you're 6 feet above sea level, you can see 7 miles over the horizon. And we could see over the horizon to where that shot tower was.
Right. So you believe that you were closer than 30 miles. But between 14 and 30 miles was
yeah.
Okay, go ahead. So what'd you see?
Well, what we saw, of course, was this explosion, this immense, huge explosion. But what was eerie was, as you said, there was no sound. When you see something like that going up, going boom, you expect the boom. And we didn't hear any boom. And we wondered what was going on. But we could see this thing rising up into the air, this fireball, as more brilliant, according to historical writers who were there, than 500 suns. Somebody called it a dark sun. This thing was rising from the ground into the air, and it was like everything we'd ever seen about the atomic bombs, the operations at Bikini and the mushroom clouds and the woman's head and hairdo and all those things that were so common on television. But this fireball and the cloud that went with it rose some 200,000 feet into the air. And it was only blocked by some strata layer up there. I don't know that much about it, but then it started to spread out, and it went, I don't know how many miles, a couple of 100 miles, the top of this fireball. And as we were watching that, and in silence, this eerie silence, what's going on? There's supposed to be a noise. There wasn't any noise. But what there was the shock wave coming at us across the ocean between us and the device.
Right.
And that was scary, because we didn't know what was going to happen when that thing, whatever it was, got to us. Because on one side of it, the far side of it, the water was very dark blue. It was being rippled by the shock coming across. On our side, it was smooth, cool, calm, you know, light blue. But that dark blue was coming at us closer and closer and closer and closer. And what's going to happen when that dark blue hits us? It hit us. it knocked us right to the deck. Every guy that was standing on that deck around me, I know went down to the deck.
And you were the one, I believe, who had yelled at everybody, hang on to something, because...
I knew something was coming, and maybe it was just plain pure fear that I needed an outlet, but I screamed as loud as I could, hold on, because that sucker's going to hit us! Or words to that effect, with a few expletives deleted.
Yeah, I'm sure it was just like that.
Yeah.
Right. And it knocked everybody to the deck.
It knocked everybody down either to the deck or slammed them up against the bulkhead behind them. Mm-hmm. Now, I must say that nobody was seriously hurt. Right. There were a lot of bumps and bruises, but nobody was seriously hurt that I'm aware of. And then with that came the boom. And the noise was incredible. It was absolutely incredible. And it went on and on and on, ringing in our ears for quite some time after the shock wave was on its way to San Francisco, I suppose. Right. I don't know.
You described it not anything like a wind, but more like a terrific G-force.
It was. It was like being slammed into the back of an airplane going into a dive.
Right.
At least from what I've read about airplanes going into dives. And you know, you were just pushed, you were forced, you were shoved. Not just your shoulders, but your entire body. Every part of your body facing that shock wave was hit at the same time. It was a wall, and you were hit by a wall that you couldn't see.
This is a good time right now to see a little bit of what Bill Harper is talking about right now, and we have some photographs that we're going to show you. First off, that is a young soldier, Bill Harper, and can I tell him what I thought, who I thought you looked? I thought that looked like a young Elvis at Fort Hood right after induction.
You want me to sing or strum my guitar? Or?
About how old were you there? You look 12, but how old do you think you were?
I was 21, I think.
21?
Yeah.
Okay. Good-looking soldier.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah.
Let's move on. There's the USS Estes, where you actually viewed the detonation from. Mm-hmm. Okay. Here is, this is a pamphlet that you were given, I guess, when you first arrived at the Marshall Islands, sort of a description of the operation, which at the time was very, very top secret. It has since been...
and that's one of those bikini shots that's on the cover there.
Exactly.
Yep.
We've got better pictures than that, though. Look what's about to come here. Here is one of the photographs coming up.
Oh.
There. Wow.
That is an island. That is a piece of land going up into the atmosphere. I don't know if that is something like the island of Manhattan.
Yeah, not a whole lot smaller than Manhattan Island.
And suddenly Manhattan is gone.
Right, right. We've got other angles.
That's the mushroom cloud that we are so familiar with, and that dark color at the bottom is that island. Those are gases up there in the cloud, but that's the dirt and dust and grit of coral of the island.
And then finally, it looks like a beautiful sunset on the beach, but it's the
fireball.
It's the fireball. Absolutely incredible.
That's right. It almost looks like, as you say, a sunset late at night, but that was 8 o'clock in the morning. 8:00:00 in the morning.
10.4 megatons of explosive power is what there was, and like we said, that's almost 500 times the power of the bomb that was dropped on
yeah, they were
Nagasaki.
talking kilotons on the Nagasaki and Hiroshima bombs, right?
Right. The effect pattern of this is something like 800 miles.
That's right.
Which I went to my maps, and that's about Galveston to El Paso, if you can think about it. That's about the width of the state of Texas.
That's right. That's right. And not that there was any serious threat from maybe 50 miles and beyond, but for some forms of plant life or other vulnerable things, it could have an effect, according to the scientists.
The Estes at the time was situated just outside of what was considered the damage diameter, or what could have been the burn diameter, which is a good thing to be just outside of it, right?
Oh, you bet about that. Although they did warn us, and that was one of those reasons we were supposed to stand with our back to it. Not only the brightness of the fireball, but the radiation effects.
This is your showstopper story that we've just told, obviously, but I want to go back. You were born in Philadelphia during the Depression. You talked about how you all would move from place to place and change your name so the bill collectors couldn't find you, and during the Depression, and like so many families did at that time. And you got into journalism at a very early age 14. You went to work for the Philadelphia Inquirer as a copy boy,
right,
which young kids that throw newspapers now don't know what a copy boy is, I understand, but you were a copy boy, and you stayed there for a while, and then your career went to someplace else for 4 years, and then finally 22 years at a final career. So sort of talk about what you did real quick.
Well, one correction there was I was 15 when I went to work for the newspaper.
Excuse me. Don't want to get them in trouble.
No. What was happening was I was in high school in the 9th grade, I think it was, and I had no interest in high school whatsoever, in school whatsoever. Right. So I would go to the school, but I wouldn't go to the classes, and I spent 3 semesters without ever going to a class. And my parents didn't know about this because I intercepted all the notes coming home, and we didn't have phones in the homes or cell phones or any of that stuff at the time.
You were a mischievous kid, weren't
you? Oh,
you,
yes,
Bill?
I had gotten a bit of trouble now and then. And finally one day I missed a note home, and my father got it, and that was the end of me. And he said, look, you lazy bum, if you're not going to go to school, you're going to go to work. And he knew the sports editor of the Philadelphia Inquirer, and he took me there and said, Leo, give this kid a job, and Leo gave me a job. So I started out as a copy boy, and that's, a glorified gopher.
Right.
I'm in the newspaper business. Wow, holy mackerel. And I spent the next 14 years with the Philadelphia Inquirer. Then I left the Inquirer after the union went out on strike, and I decided I didn't want to stay there anymore. And I went to work for something called the Chilton Company, which publishes a lot of trade journals, Iron Age magazine, et cetera, et cetera. 2 of which were natural gas-oriented magazines. They needed an editor. I had the qualifications from the newspaper as a writer, reporter, editor there, went to work for the magazines. 4 years of that gas industry experience, the Midwest Gas Association, headquartered in Minneapolis, Minnesota, needed a managing director, and I was hired for that job and spent the next 27 years in Minneapolis.
27 years.
Yes, sir.
In 1993, you came to Texas, and I want you to tell this story. You came to Texas by sailboat from Lake Superior to the Gulf, down the Illinois and the mighty Mississippi on a sailboat, and you even wrote a book about it called We Three, Fred the Ferry Boat and Me, which is available on what they call Kindle right now, I understand. Give you your plug right there.
Thank you.
That was quite an adventure.
It was an amazing trip, it really was, because Fred Ebden was the editor of one of those gas magazines that I mentioned that I worked for.
Right.
And Fred went his way and I went my way, and we stayed in contact with each other and were friends for 50 years or so. But in 1993, putting it very bluntly, I ran away from home in Minnesota and took my sailboat and headed for the Gulf of Mexico, where I was going to then sail off into the sunset and come what may. But I sailed the sailboat through 3 of the Great Lakes, Superior, Huron, and Michigan, and got to Chicago, the city of Chicago. And there we had to take the masts down on the sailboat, because you can't go through Chicago with 50-foot masts sticking up, because they have bridges that get in your way, and that's no fun.
Right.
But Fred and I brought that boat down the Chicago River, into the Illinois River, into the Mississippi River, into the Chafalaya Waterway, and into the Intracoastal Canal, and ended up in Freeport, Texas. Now, I knew Freeport, Texas, because I used to have a place in Galveston when I was in the working world. So every time I would come down to Galveston, I would scout out ports along the Gulf of Mexico, knowing that someday I was going to come down there in a sailboat. But we ran into a lot of trials and tribulations. We were almost killed a couple of times. We were almost run over by the towboats going plowing the rivers, and they really do plow those rivers. And the other fascinating thing about it was this was the year of 1993, the year of the big floods on the Mississippi River. Millions of acres were underwater, and billions of dollars in crop and land were lost, and farms ended up in the Gulf of Mexico. And what that did to the rivers was, for instance, the channels are marked by buoys, and you're supposed to stay between the buoys, and in this case, the red ones are on your right and the green ones are on your left. But the turbulence of the rivers put the green ones on the right and the red ones on the left in some cases, and you didn't know where the channel was. And that got to be quite a guessing game. And my friend Fred was from Houston.
Right.
We were doing this in November, and Fred froze to death every minute of the trip. Being a thin-blooded, warm-blooded Texan, the chill of Chicago, he never quite got over it for the entire length of the trip. We almost did get killed, as I say. We had an occasion where the current of the river took the boat almost out of our control. Even though it had a 130 horsepower diesel engine, that river was running at 7, 8, 9 knots,
Right.
versus a normal 3 knots. So you can see it was 2 or 3 times its normal speed. And that can do strange things with a sailboat that you can hardly control.
What an adventure that was.
It was.
Bill Harper is a author, is a writer. He has written 5 books, the most notable of which is this one, as a matter of fact, 11 Days in Hell. It's the story of the 1974 Carrasco prison siege at Huntsville. We've just got a couple of minutes left, but sort of talk about the genesis of how this book got written and your interest, and of course your own friendship with Bob Wyatt, a person who very well respected in this community, former head of police here at Texas A&M. Sort of talk about this book in about 60 seconds that we've got.
Well, Bob Wyatt was the genesis for this book for me, in that he was my first interview and he set it up for me to meet other people that were involved in this story. But where it really came from was from the Brazos Writers Group, of which in the year 2000, I was president of the Brazos Writers Group, and I invited the curator of the Cushing Library on Texas A&M to come and talk to the group, tell us what they have and what they didn't have that writers would be interested in. He came and he talked about this collection of papers called the Estelle Papers. Nobody's ever looked at those papers, he said. So I thought I would do the courtesy call and go over and look at the Estelle Papers, and when I started through the boxes of the files, 14 boxes of files on the Estelle Papers, I suddenly came across a whole bunch of newspaper clippings about this takeover in 1974. Being an old newspaper man, I was intrigued by this story. I figured it had been written up and down several times, and I found out it never was. Only 2 books had been written. They were both written by hostages, and they were from the hostage viewpoint only, so I figured that story had to be told, and that book told it.
It's a fascinating book, and it's a fascinating story, and you've written other books, one, An Eye for an Eye, in defense of the death penalty, and a work that you're working on right now about the misjudgments of appointments of Supreme Court justices.
Regrettable Supreme Court nominations.
Indeed, indeed. What a fascinating career, what a fascinating life. You're 80 years old.
Yes, sir.
You act like you're 60. You look like you're 60.
If I had acted like I was 60 when I was 60, I'd be better off.
Thank you very much, Bill, for being our guest.
Before I get off, can I say one more thing?
Very quickly.
Very quickly. Yeah. Thank you for what you did with donating your stories from this program to the Historical Society of the Brazos Valley.
It's an honor to do it. Ann Boykin is a very good friend of ours, and she does great work. Thank you for being with us. Operation Ivy was some 57 years ago, but as Bill Harper wrote himself, what he saw that day in the Marshall Islands, he'll never forget. It was the birth of a new scientific age, the hydrogen age. He wrote, the devil himself couldn't have produced anything more fearful. What an intriguing recollection of history, and we salute Bill Harper for his service. I'm Tom Turbeville. Join us next time on Veterans of the Valley.